Greetings, one and all, once again, to Exploring Arda, a Tolkien-centered podcast where I am your host, Jackson, and together we are exploring a bunch of Tolkien's works other than Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So, now that you guys have been listening and watching probably for a bit, hopefully, I hope there's some returning viewers or listeners. That'd be really cool if there were. Make sure to comment below if you're still here after a few episodes, or if you're new. That'd be really cool. Just to see you down in the comments and seeing what you guys like or enjoy about the show or about the book, because we are going still through the Silmarillion. I wanted to first go through the second part of chapter 21, because I did start it last time, and two, because of due to the nature of Beren and Luthien being a very long tale, and this one of Túrin Turambar being pretty much the same length, I decided to split it in half because I think it's just a little easier that way. So, hopefully you guys have been enjoying pretty much all of that. So, there's not really much else with introductions. I'm going to do all my personal, plugging at the end of the show, so I would appreciate it if you guys would check it out at the end of the show, because I know that some people don't really enjoy all the rambling at the front. So, I'm saving you guys the time. So that means we can go back into the story. Now, if you remember from the last chapter, we kind of led off where Túrin is basic. Did I just say Túrin? Túrin. I'm sorry. At first I thought I said Húrin, and I'm like Túrin, and I'm like, okay, well, this is Túrin. This is Túrin Turambar. So he is still in Nargothrond, and he has been given the sword of the cursed, quote-unquote cursed sword of Anglicel. And pretty much with him and Anglicel, they're pretty much known as the Mormeggle, which is a threat against Morgoth and the orcs, because I guess together it's they're a nasty duo. And I would say nasty when it comes to the orcs trying to fight him off, but he can't. So he's pretty much in Nargothrond and just chilling out. So now we're going to go back into the story, because might as well just make it fast. So here we go. In that time of respite and hope, when because of the deeds of the Mormeggle, the power of Morgoth was stemmed west of Sirion, Morwen fled at last from Dorlamine with Nienor, her daughter, and adventured the long journey to Thingol's halls. There new grief awaited her, for she found Túrin gone, and to Doriath there had come no tidings since the dragon helm had vanished from the lands west of Sirion. But Morwen remained in Doriath with Nienor as guest of Thingol and Melian, and retreated with honor. Now it came to pass, when 495 years had passed since the rising of the moon, in the spring of the year, there came to Nargothrond 2 elves, named Gelmir and Arminas. They were of Angrod's people, but since the dagger of Bragalock, sorry, a little kind of thing here. I've always said Bragalach. I think it's Bragalock with a K. Well, with a K sound. Anyway, but since the dagger of Bragalock, they dwelt in the south with Círdan the shipwright. From their far journeys they brought tidings of a great mustering of orcs and evil creatures under the eaves of Ered Wethrin, and in the pass of Sirion. And they told also that Ulmo had come to Círdan, giving warning that great peril drew nigh to Nargothrond. Hear the words of the Lord of Waters, said they to the king. Thus he spoke to Círdan the shipwright. The evil of the north has defiled the springs of Sirion, and my power withdraws from the fingers of the flowing waters. But a worse thing is yet to come forth. Say therefore to the Lord of Nargothrond, shut the doors of the fortress and go not abroad. Cast the stones of your pride into the loud river, that the creeping evil may not find the gate. Orodreth was troubled by the dark words of the messengers, but Túrin would by no means hearken to these counsels, and least of all he would suffer the great bridge to be cast down, for he was become proud and stern, and would order all things as he wished. Soon afterwards Handir, lord of Brethil, was slain, for the orcs invaded his land, and Handir gave them battle. But the men of Brethil was worsted and driven back into their woods. And in the autumn of that year, biting his hour, Morgoth loosed upon the people of Narog the great host that he had long prepared. And Glaurung the Uruloki passed over Angfaglith, and came thence into the north vales of Sirion, and there did great evil. Under the shadows of Ered Wethrin, he defiled the Aethel Ivrin, and thence he passed into the realm of Nargothrond, and burned the Talathdyrnan in the guarded plain between Narog and Teglin. Then the warriors of Nargothrond went forth, and tall and terrible on that day looked Túrin, and the heart of the host was upheld as he rode on the right hand of Orodreth. But greater far was the host of Morgoth that any scouts had told, and none but Túrin, defended by his dwarf mask, could withstand the approach of Glaurung. And the elves were driven back and pressed by the orcs into the field of Tumhalad, between Ginglith, there we go, and Narog. And there they were penned. On that day all the pride and host of Nargothrond withered away, and Orodreth was slain in the forefront of the battle, and Gwyndor son of Gwilyn was wounded to the death. But Túrin came to his aid, and all fled before him, and he bore Gwyndor out of the road, and escaping into a wood there laid him on the grass. Then Gwyndor said to Túrin, "Let bearing pay for bearing, but ill-fated was mine, and vain is thine. For my body is marred beyond healing, and I must leave Middle-earth. And though I love thee, son of Húrin, yet I rue the day that I took thee from the orcs. But for thy prowess and thy pride, still I should have love and life, and Nargothrond should yet stand a while. Now if thou love me, leave me. Haste thee to Nargothrond, and save Finduilas. And this last I say to thee, she alone stands between thee and thy doom. If thou fail her, it shall not fail to find thee. Farewell." So, a little bit of a break here. Obviously, since this is still in the middle of, the wars of Beleriand, Morgoth's forces are just pursuing and just taking over the land still. This is a time where everything's running rampant, and it's not a good time for pretty much anybody, really. Dwarves are mostly in hiding, I feel like, for the majority of, I would say the majority of the Wars of Beleriand. You don't see, or how to say, you don't really hear too much of the dwarves except for, the past, couple pages where it was with Mim the dwarf, and Túrin kind of befriending the dwarves as well, and since he gets his, their armor and whatnot, but still, the race of mankind and elves suffer a lot from the forces of Morgoth. And of course, Glaurung is now back again on the battlefield, unfortunately, and yeah, he ends up, destroying and killing, just like he usually does. And yeah, sadly, Gwyndor now ends up dying during one of the battles as well. So that means after Beleg dies, obviously, because Beleg and Túrin were very close, now instead his next quote-unquote friend after Beleg, Gwyndor, now dies. So his story is just full of death and full of misery and pain, and it's not a good time for Túrin. So, but it's him, pursuing, the good things until the end. So I kind of, that's what I really like about Túrin. So back to the story here before I get too sidetracked and just making sure I'm good. All right. Then Túrin sped back to Nargothrond, mustering such of the route as he met with on the way. And the leaves fell from the trees in a great wind as they went, for the autumn was passing in a dire winter. But the host of the orcs and Glaurung the dragon were there before him, and they came suddenly, ere those that were left on guard were aware of what had befallen on the field of Tumhalad. In that day the bridge over Narog proved an evil, for it was great and mightily made, and could not swiftly be destroyed. And the enemy came readily over the deep river, and Glaurung came in full fire against the doors of Felagund, and overthrew them, and passed within. And even as Túrin came up the dreadful sack of Nargothrond, Even as Túrin came up, the dreadful sack of Nargothrond was well nigh achieved. There you go. The orcs had slain or driven off all that remained in arms, and were even then ransacking the great halls and chambers, plundering and destroying. But those of the women and maidens that were not burned or slain they had herded on the terraces before the doors, as slaves to be taken into Morgoth's thraldom. Upon this ruin and woe Túrin came, and none could withstand him, or would not, though he struck down all before him, and passed over the bridge and hewed his way towards the captives. But now he stood alone, for the few that followed him had fled. But in that moment Glaurung issued from the gaping doors, and lay behind, between Túrin and the bridge. Then suddenly he spoke by the evil spirit that was in him, saying, "Hail, son of Túrin, well met." Then Túrin sprang about and strode against him, and the edges of Gurthang shone as with flame. But Glaurung withheld his blast, and opened wide his serpent eyes, and gazed upon Túrin. Without fear, Túrin looked into them as he raised up the sword, and straightway he fell under the binding spell of the lidless eyes of the dragon, and was halted moveless. Then for a long time he stood as one graven on stone, and they too were alone, silent before the doors of Nargothrond. But Glaurung spoke again, taunting Túrin, and he said, "Evil have been all thy ways, son of Túrin, thankless fosterling, outlaw, slayer of thy friend, thief of love, usurper of Nargothrond, captain foolhardy, and deserter of thy kin. Wow, I can't talk. As thralls, thy mother and thy sister live in Dorlamin, in misery and want. Thou art arrayed as a prince, but they go in rags. And for thee they yearn, but thou carest not for that. Glad may thy father be to learn that he hath such a son, as learn he shall." And Túrin, being under the spell of Glaurung, hearkened to his words, and he saw himself as in a mirror misshapen by malice, and loathed at what he saw. And while he was yet held by the eyes of the dragon in torment of mind, and could not stir, the orcs drove away the herded captives, and they passed nigh to Túrin and crossed over the bridge. Among them was Finduilas, and she cried out to Túrin as she went, but not until her cries and the wailings of the captives was lost upon the northern road did Glaurung release Túrin. Wow, Túrin. And he might not stop his ears against that voice that haunted him after. Then suddenly Glaurung withdrew his glance and waited, and Túrin stirred slowly, as one waking from a hideous dream. Then coming to himself, he sprang upon the dragon with a cry. But Glaurung laughed, saying, "If thou wilt be slain, I will slay thee gladly. But small help will that be to Morwen and Nienor. No heed didst thou give to the cries of the elf-woman. Wilt thou deny also the bond of thy blood?" But Túrin, drawing back his sword, stabbed at the dragon's eyes, and Glaurung, coiling back, swiftly towered above him and said, "Nay, at least thou art valiant, beyond all whom I have met, and they lie who say that we of our part do not honor the valor of foes. See now, I offer thee freedom. Go to thy kin if thou canst. Get thee gone, and if elf or man be left to make tale of these days, then surely in scorn they will name thee, if thou spurnest this gift." Okay, there's more. Okay, almost there. Then Túrin, being yet bemused by the eyes of the dragon, as were he treating with a foe that could no pity, believed the words of Glaurung, and turning away he sped over the bridge. But as he went, Glaurung spoke behind him, saying, in a fell voice, "Haste thee now, son of Túrin, to Dorlamin, or perhaps the orcs shall come before thee once again. And if thou tarry for Finduilas, then never shalt thou see Morwen again, and never at all shalt thou see Nienor thy sister, and they will curse thee." Okay, nope, we got a little bit more, sorry. But Túrin passed away on the northward road, and Glaurung laughed once more, for he had accomplished the errand of his master. Then he turned to his own pleasure and sent forth his blast, and burned all about him. But all the orcs that were busy in the sack he routed forth, and drove them away, and denied them their plunder even to the last thing of worth. The bridge then he broke down and cast into the foam of Narog, and being thus secure, he gathered all the hoard and riches of Felagund, and heaped them, and lay upon them in the innermost hall, and rested a while. And Túrin hasted along the ways to the north, through the lands now desolate between Narog and Tiglin, and the fell winter came down to meet him. For in that year snow fell ere autumn was past, and spring came late and cold. Ever it seemed to him as he went that he heard the cries of Finduilas, calling his name by wood and hill, and great was his anguish. But his heart being hot with the lies of Glaurung, and seeing ever in his mind the orcs burning the house of Túrin, or putting Morwen and Nienor to torment, he held on his way, and turned never aside. Okay, now we're going to do a little bit of a break. So Glaurung, and I always forget this part of, I don't know why I forgot that. I knew that Glaurung could talk, but I didn't realize how much he talked, I suppose. Normally you don't get too much dialogue in chapters, especially in the Silmarillion, but Glaurung speaks it's very hard to read out loud, especially with like the old English phrasings and the words and stuff. It's absolutely cool and really really cool. Like it's super brilliant and it's intelligent. You can tell he's a very intelligent dragon, which is really cool to see, and it's interesting to see I guess in a fantasy setting. Like sure, maybe some dragons do talk, but just the way that Glaurung is. Plus, he has like this spell on him that if you look in his eyes, he can pretty much just like freeze you, or he can get into your mind, which is terrifying. Like, just imagine facing the dragon first of all, just a dragon, and then on top of that, he can get into your mind and pretty much just tell you that all these nightmares are true and you should go do that. And then even with the mindset of Túrin, who is very strong, I would say strong-willed, even him, he falls under Glaurung's spell, and now he's thinking that in Norlamin, his mother and sister are pretty much in torment and might die. So it is terrible, and I forgot how much of a villain Glaurung is. he's a terrible creature, but I mean he was sent from Morgoth, so it only makes sense. So, and Glaurung is even a bully to the orcs too. He burns everything, and he's just like, you can't even get the treasure here, and then he just takes whatever he can, and he's like, that's mine now. So I just thought it was kind of funny. So now we can go back into the chapter, into the story here. All right, let's go. At last, worn by haste in the long road, for 40 leagues and more that he had journeyed without rest, he came with the first ice of winter to the pools of Ivrin, where before he had been healed. But they were now but a frozen mire. Interesting, okay. And he could drink there no more. Thus he came hardly by the passes of Dorlamin, through bitter snows from the north, and found again the land of his childhood. Bare and bleak it was, and Morwen was gone. Her house stood empty, broken and cold, and no living thing dwelt nigh. Therefore Túrin departed and came to the house of Brada the Easterling, he that had to wife Erin, Hurin's kinswoman, and there he learned of an old servant that Morwen was long gone, for she had fled with Nienor out of Dorlamin, none but Erin knew where. Then Túrin strode to Brada's table, and seizing him, he drew his sword and demanded that he be told whither Morwen had gone, and Erin declared to him that she went to Doriath to seek her son. For the lands were freed then from evil, she said, by the black sword of the south, who now has fallen, they say. Then Túrin's eyes were opened, and the last threads of Glaurung's spell were loosed, and for anguish and wrath at the lies that had deluded him, and hatred of the oppressors of Morwen, a black rage seized him, and he slew Brada in his hall, and other Easterlings that were his guests. Thereafter he fled into the winter, a hunted man, but he was aided by some that remained of Hador's people, and knew the ways of the wild, and with them he escaped through the falling snow and came to an outlaw's refuge in the southern mountains of Dorlamin. Thence Túrin passed again from the land of his childhood, and returned to Cirian's Vale. His heart was bitter, for to Dorlamin he had brought only greater woe upon the remnant of his people, and they were glad of his going, and this comfort alone he had, that by the prowess of the black sword the ways to Doriath had been laid open to Morwen. And he said in thought, then those deeds wrought not evil to all, and where else might I have better bestowed my kin, even had I come sooner? For if the girdle of Melian be broken, then last hope is ended. Nay, it is better indeed as things be, for a shadow I cast wheresoever I come. Let Melian keep them, and I will leave them in peace, unshadowed for a while. Now Túrin coming down from arid Wethrin, sought for Finduilas in vain, roaming the woods beneath the mountains, wild and wary as a beast. And he waylaid all the roads that went north to the pass of Cirian. But he was too late, for all the trails had grown old or were washed away by the winter. Yet thus it was that passing southwards, down Teaglin, Túrin came upon some of the men of Brethil that were surrounded by orcs, and he delivered them, for the orcs fled from Gurthang. He named himself Wildman of the Woods, and they besought him to come and dwell with them. But he said that he had an errand yet unachieved, to seek Finduilas, Orodreth's daughter of Nargothrond. Then Dorlas, the leader of these woodsmen, told the grievous tidings of her death. For the men of Brethil had waylaid at the crossings of Teaglin the orc host that led the captives of Nargothrond, hoping to rescue them. But the orcs had at once cruelly slain their prisoners, and Finduilas they pinned to a tree with a spear. So she died, saying at the last, "Tell the Mormegal that Finduilas is here." Therefore they had laid her in a mound near that place, and named it Hod en Eleth, the mound of the elf maid. Túrin bade them lead him thither, and there he fell down into a darkness of grief that was near death. Then Dorlas, by his black sword, the fame whereof had come even to the deeps of Brethil, and by his quest of the king's daughter, knew that this wild man was indeed the Mormegal of Nargothrond, whom rumour said was the son of Hurin of Dorlumin. Therefore the woodman, excuse me again. Therefore the woodmen lifted him up, and bore him away to their homes. Now those were set in a stockade upon a high place in the forest, Ethel Brandir, upon Ammon Obel, for the people of Haleth were now dwindled by war, and Brandir, son of Handir, who ruled them, was a man of gentle mood, and lame also from childhood, and he trusted rather in secrecy than in deeds of war to save them from the power of the north. Therefore he feared the tidings that Dorlas brought, and when he beheld the face of Túrin as he lay on the bier of a cloud of foreboding lay on his heart. There you go. Nonetheless, being moved by his woe, he took him into his own house and tended him, for he had skill in healing. And with the beginning of spring, Túrin cast off his darkness and grew hale again. And he arose, and he thought that he would remain in Brethil hidden, and put his shadow behind him, forsaking the past. He took therefore a new name, Turambar, which in the high elven speech signified Master of Doom. And he besought the woodman to forget that he was a stranger among them, or ever bore any other name. Nonetheless, he would not wholly leave deeds of war, for he could not endure that the orcs should come to the crossings of Tegelin, or draw nigh to Hod en Eleth, and he made that a place of dread for them, so that they shunned it. But he laid his black sword by, and wielded rather the bow and the spear. Okay, little break here again here. I'm trying to read as much as I can, just so I'd have a little bit less breaks. I feel like that'd be a better format, I think. Yeah, so now we finally get to his, because he renames himself a lot, because he's in grief, and I wouldn't say torment, but it would be kind of like more of a torment of the mind, because there is so much that like happens for him that eventually he does name himself now Turambar, which is basically Master of Doom, because pretty much wherever he goes, something bad happens. I think that's kind of like the main premise of what Túrin's story is all about. Is if you guys remember that Hurin's bloodline, pretty much, his bloodline, the children of Hurin, are going to be forever cursed. And so, of course, this is Túrin's story, and this is pretty much Morgoth's curse on Hurin. He has to pretty much learn of all of Túrin's deeds, and of course, look at all this death that happens in Túrin's, just in his one lifetime, as a race of mankind. So it is not fun. It's not fun for him. So not only does his two friends die, but now his quote unquote lover, I wouldn't really want to say lover, but he goes to find her, and she's been killed by orcs and speared and stuck to a tree. I was like, that's brutal. That's really brutal. But yeah, and then he goes into a deep depression until he pretty much renames himself Turambar. So, and all of the men of Brethil kind of like keep him in their lands just because they respect him, I feel like. So, but yeah, now we can just go right back into the story, because quick summaries are good. So here we go. Now new tidings came to Doriath concerning Nargothrond. For some that had escaped from the defeat in the sack, and had survived the fell winter in the wild, came at last to Thingol seeking refuge, and the march wardens brought them to the king. And some said that all the enemy had withdrawn northwards, and others that Glaurung abode still in the halls of Felagund. And some said that the Mormegal was slain, and others that he was cast under a spell by the dragon, and dwelt there yet, as one changed to stone. But all declared that it was known to many in Nargothrond ere the end that the Mormegal was none other than Túrin, son of Hurin of Dorlumin. Then Morwen was distraught, and refusing the counsel of Melian, she rode forth alone into the wild to seek her son, or some true tidings of him. Thingol therefore sent Mablung after her, with many hardy marchwards, to find her and guard her, and to learn what news they might. But Nienor was bidden to remain behind. Yet the fearlessness of her house was hers, and in an evil hour, in hope that Morwen would return, when she saw that her daughter would go with her into peril, Nienor disguised herself as one of Thingol's people, and went with that ill-fated riding. They came upon Morwen by the banks of Sirion, and Mablung besought her to return to Menegroth, but she was fey and would not be persuaded. Then also the coming of Nienor was revealed, and despite Morwen's command, she would not go back, and Mablung perforce brought them to the hidden fairies at the Mirrors of Twilight, and they passed over Sirion. And after 3 days' journeying, they came to Amon Ether, the Hill of Spies, that long ago Felagund had caused to be raised with great labor, a league before the doors of Nargothrond. There Mablung set a guard of riders about Morwen and her daughter, and forbade them to go further. But he, seeing that from the hill no sign of any enemy, went down with his scouts to Narog, as stealthily as they could go. But Glaurung was aware of all that they did, and he came forth in a heat of wrath, and lay into the river, and a vast vapor and foul reek went up, in which Mablung and his company were blinded and lost. Then Glaurung passed east over Narog. Seeing the onset of the dragon, the guards upon Amon Ether sought to lead Morwen and Nienor away, and fly with them with all speed back eastwards. But the wind bore the blank mist upon them, and their horses were maddened by the dragon stench, and were ungovernable, and ran this way and that, so that some were dashed against trees and were slain, and others were borne far away. Thus the ladies were lost, and of Morwen indeed no sure tidings came ever to Doriath after. But Nienor, being thrown by her steed, yet unhurt, made her way back to Amon Ether, there to awake Mablung, and came thus above the reek into the sunlight. And looking westward, she stared straight into the eyes of Glaurung, whose head lay upon the hilltop. Her will strove with him for a while, but he put forth his power, and having learned who she was, he constrained her to gaze into his eyes, and he laid a spell of utter darkness and forgetfulness upon her, so that she could remember nothing that had ever befallen her, nor her own name, nor the name of any other thing, and for many days she could neither hear, see, nor stir by her own will. Then Glaurung left her standing alone upon Amon Ether, and went back to Nargothrond. Okay. Another quick break here, just to check how much longer. I have a lot longer to go with this chapter. I thought it was a little shorter. Okay, so yeah, here we go, Glaurung the bully, again. So not only does he emit this foul odor that pretty much drives people insane, not only people but horses apparently, and everybody scatters and runs away. But of course Nienor is kind of like, well, I need to go to a place that I know at least for a short while to be safe. But here comes Glaurung again and his nasty spells of darkness, and now he pretty much causes her to forget everybody that she knows. I would say everything and everybody that she knows. So now she's completely lost. She doesn't know who she is, I would suppose. Well, maybe, because it was her own name or the name of any other thing. So yeah, pretty much she has no idea where she is, or who she should trust, which is terrible. So here we go again with Glaurung the bully. So yeah, and we're just going to continue the story. Now Mablung, who greatly daring had explored the halls of Felagund when Glaurung left them, fled from them at the approach of the dragon, and returned to Amon Ether. The sun sank and night fell as he climbed the hill, and he found none there save Nienor, standing alone under the stars as an image of stone. No word she spoke or heard, but would follow if he took up her hand. Therefore in great grief he led her away, though it seemed to him vain, for they were both like to perish, succourless in the wild. But they were found by 3 of Mablung's companions, and slowly they journeyed northward and eastward towards the fences of the land of Doriath beyond Sirion, and the guarded bridge nigh to the inflowing of Escalduin. Slowly the strength of Nienor returned as they drew near to Doriath, but still she could not speak or hear, and walked blindly as she was led. But even as they drew near the fences, at last she closed her staring eyes and would sleep, and they laid her down and rested also, unheedfully, for they were utterly outworn. There they were assailed by an orc band, such as now roamed often as nigh the fences of Doriath as they dared. But Nienor in that hour recovered hearing and sight, and being awakened by the cries of the orcs, she sprang up in terror, and fled ere they could come to her. Then the orcs gave chase, and the elves after, and they overtook the orcs and slew them ere they could harm her. But Nienor escaped them, for she fled as in a madness of fear, swifter than a deer, and tore off all her clothing as she ran, until she was naked, and she passed out of their sight, running northward, and though they sought her long, they found her not, nor any trace of her. And at last Mablung in despair returned to Menegroth and told the tidings. Then Thingol and Melian were filled with grief, but Mablung went forth, and sought long in vain for tidings of Morwen and Nienor. But Nienor ran into the woods until she was spent, and then fell and slept and awoke. And it was a sunlit morning, and as she rejoiced in light as it were a new thing, and all things else that she saw seemed new and strange, for she had no names for them. Nothing did she remember save a darkness that lay behind her, and a shadow of fear. Therefore she went warily as a hunted beast, and became famished, for she had no food, and knew not how to seek it. But coming at last to the crossings of Tiglan, she passed over, seeking the shelter of the great trees of Brethil, for she was afraid, and it seemed to her that the darkness was overtaking her again, from which she had fled. I'll just keep going. But it was a great storm of thunder that came up from the south, and in terror she cast herself down upon the mound of Haud in Elith, stopping her ears from the thunder. But the rain smote her and trenched her, and she lay like a wild beast that is dying. There Turambar found her, as he came to the crossings of Tiglan, having heard rumor of orcs that roamed near, and seeing in a flare of lightning the body as it seemed of a slain maiden lying upon the mound of Finduilas, he was stricken to the heart. But the woodman lifted her up, and Turambar cast his cloak about her, and they took her to a lodge nearby, and warmed her, and gave her food. And as soon as she looked upon Turambar, she was comforted, for it seemed to her that she had found at last something she had sought in her darkness, and she would not be parted from him. But when he asked her concerning her name, and her kin, and her misadventure, then she became troubled as a child that perceives that something is demanded, but cannot understand what it may be, and she wept. Therefore Turambar said, "Do not be troubled, the tale shall wait, but I will give you a name, and I will call you, Nienor. I will say Nienor, Tear Maiden." And at that name she shook her head, but said, Nienor. That was the first word she spoke after her darkness, and it remained her name among the woodmen ever after. Alright, so now we can do a little bit of a break. So even after the curse of Glaurung, Nienor still has a lot of problems over the course of the next few days. She becomes completely lost. I would assume that would be really terrifying as well, just alone in the woods, so that would be really bad. But she actually comes across, what is that hill called? Haud in Elith, there you go. And I feel like it would only make sense just because it's like, that's where Finduilas was, buried and stuff, and so of course Túrin would continually come back to this place, and it's a good thing he did, otherwise Nienor would have died. So he gets to pretty much save his own sister, even though he doesn't recognize who she is. I don't know. Maybe it's just because she's been out in the wild for a long time, and I don't know. Maybe that's what it was. So that's what I was kind of confused at for a little bit, but back to the story here, I would assume. So, okay, we're all good. On the next day, they bore her towards Ethel Brandir, but when they came to Dimros, the rainy stair, where the tumbling stream of Celebros fell towards Tiglan, a great shuddering came upon her, wherefore afterwards that place was called Nengirth, the shuddering water. Ere she came to the home of the woodman upon Ammon Obel, she was sick of a fever, and long she lay thus, tended by the women of Brethil, and they taught her language as to an infant. But ere the autumn came by the skill of Brandir, she was healed of her sickness, and she could speak. But nothing did she remember of the time before she was found by Turambar on the mound of Haud in Elith. And Brandir loved her, but all her heart was given to Turambar. In that time the woodmen were not troubled by the orcs, and Turambar went not to war, and there was peace in Brethil. His heart turned to Nienor, and he asked her in marriage, but for that time she delayed in spite of her love. For Brandir foreboded he knew not what, and sought to restrain her, rather for her sake than his own or rivalry with Turambar. And he revealed to her that Turambar was Túrin, son of Hurin, and though she knew not the name, a shadow fell upon her mind. But when 3 years were past since the sack of Nargothrond, Turambar asked Nienor again, and vowed that now he would wed her, or else go back to war in the wild. And Nienor took him with joy, and they were wedded at the midsummer, and the woodmen of Brethil made a great feast. But ere the end of the year, Glaurung sent orcs of his dominion against Brethil, and Turambar sat at home deedless, for he had promised to Nienor that he would go to battle only if their homes were assailed. But the woodmen were worsted, and Dorlas upbraided him that he would not aid the people that he had taken for his own. Then Turambar arose and brought forth again his black sword, and he gathered a great company of the men of Brethil, and they defeated the orcs utterly. But Glaurung heard tidings that the black sword was in Brethil, and he pondered what he heard, devising new evil. I need to take a little bit of a break because I don't know if I'm reading this correctly or if I'm just I don't really have my phone with me, but man, I don't know if I read it wrong, but I always thought that but did I read that incorrectly or something? Because I thought, hold on, Nienor or Nienor, I thought that was his sister or something. So that's why I'm very confused. So if you guys think that I'm wrong, I don't know, just let me know. Because for the longest time, I thought Nienor was actually his sister or something. That's why I thought it was really weird. But who knows? Okay, I might be wrong. That would be really kind of funny. Anyway, we're going to go back into the story. So, in the spring of the year after Nienor conceived, and she became Wan? It says W-A-N. Maybe it was Wayne? I don't know. And sad. There you go. And at the same time, there came to Brandir the first rumors that Glaurung had issued from Nargothrond. Then Turambar sent out scouts far afield, for now he ordered things as he would, and few gave heed to Brandir. As it drew near to summer, Glaurung came to the borders of Brethil, and lay near the west shores of Teaglin. And then there was great fear among the woodsfolk, for it was now plain that the great worm would assail them, and ravage their land, and not pass by, returning to Angband as they hoped. They sought therefore the counsel of Turambar, and he counselled them that it was vain to go against Glaurung with all their force, for only by cunning and good fortune could they defeat him. He bade the rest of the people to remain. Whoa, I skipped a sentence. Whoops. He offered therefore himself to seek the dragon on the borders of the land, and bade the rest of the people to remain at Brandir, but to prepare for flight. For if Glaurung had the victory, he would come first to the woodmen's home to destroy them, and they could not hope to withstand him. But if they then scattered far and wide, then many might escape, for Glaurung would not take up his dwelling in Brethil, and would return soon to Nargothrond. Then Turambar asked for companions willing to aid him in his peril, and Dorlas stood forth, but no others. Therefore Dorlas upbraided the people, and spoke scorn of Brandir, who could not play the part of their heir of the house of Haleth. And Brandir was shamed before his people, and was bitter at heart. But Hunthor, kinsman of Brandir, asked his leave to go in his stead. Then Turambar said farewell to Nienor, and she was filled with fear and foreboding, and their parting was sorrowful. But Turambar set out with 2 companions, and went to Nen-Gareth. Then Nienor, being unable to endure her fear, and unwilling to wait in the Ephel tidings of Turambar's fortune, set forth after him, and a great company went with her. At this Brandir was filled all the more with dread, and he sought to dissuade her and the people that would go with her from this rashness, but they heeded him not. Therefore he renounced his lordship, and all love for the people that had scorned him, and having naught left but his love for Nienor, he girt himself with a sword, and went after her, but being lame he fell far behind. Now Turambar came to Nen-Gareth at sundown, and there he learned that Glaurung lay on the brink of the high shores of Teaglin, and was like to move when night fell. Then he called those tidings good, for the dragon lay at Cabot en Aras, where the river ran in a deep and narrow gorge, that a hunted deer might overleap, and Turambar thought that he would seek no further, but would attempt to pass over the gorge. Therefore he purposed to creep down at dusk and descend into the ravine under night, and cross over the wild water, and then to climb up the further cliff, and so come to the dragon beneath his guard. This counsel he took, but the heart of Dorlas failed when they came to the races of Tieglin in the dark, and he dared not attempt the perilous crossing, but drew back and lurked in the woods, burdened with shame. Turambar and Hunthor, nonetheless, crossed over in safety, for the loud roaring of the water drowned out all other sounds, and Glaurung slept. But ere the middle night, the dragon roused, and with a great noise and blast cast his forward part across the chasm, and began to draw his bulk after. Turambar and Hunthor were well nigh overcome by the heat and the stench, but they sought in haste for a way up to come at Glaurung, and Gunther was slain by a great stone that was dislodged from on high by the passage of the dragon, and smote him on the head and cast him into the river. So he ended of the house of Haleth, not the least valiant. So, another death in Túrin's story. Like, wow, like he is not kidding when he said that he names himself, what was it? Something of Doom, Master of Doom. Wherever he goes, there is death. So, I mean, it is terrible. Talk about having bad luck for a long time, pretty much for his whole life, which is terrible. Like, there's good moments, here and there, but everyone that he meets, something bad happens to them. So, I just think it's just very unlucky that when Glaurung pretty much moves out of his slumber and just done. What was it? Hunthor. Yeah, Hunthor was just done. One hit to the head. So that's terrible. Even if it wasn't necessarily Túrin's fault, he still wanted to come with. So I was like, that's unfortunate. So so now we're gonna go into the story again. Then Turambar summoned Then Turambar summoned all his will and courage and climbed the cliff alone and came beneath the dragon. Then he drew Gurthang, and with all the might of his arm and of his hate he thrust it into the soft belly of the worm, even up to the hilts. But when Glaurung felt his death pang, he screamed, and in his dreadful throe he heaved up his bulk and hurled himself across the chasm, and there lay lashing and coiling in his agony. And he set all in a blaze about him, and beat all to ruin, until at last his fire died, and lay still. Now Gurthang had been wrested from Turambar's hand in the throe of Glaurung, and it clave to the belly of the dragon. Turambar therefore crossed the water once more, desiring to recover his sword and to look upon his foe, and he found him stretched at his length, and rolled up one side, and the hilts of Gurthang stood in his belly. Then Turambar seized the hilts and set his foot upon the belly, and cried in mockery of the dragon, and his words at Nargothrond, "Hail, worm of Morgoth, well met again! Die now, and the darkness have thee. Thus is Túrin son of Húrin avenged." Then he wrenched out the sword, but a spout of black blood followed it, and fell on his hand, and the venom burned it. And thereupon Glaurung opened his eyes, and looked upon Turambar with such malice that it smote him as a blow. And by that stroke, in the anguish of the venom, he fell into a dark swoon, and lay as one dead, and his sword was beneath him. The screams of Glaurung rang in the woods, and came to the people that waited at Nengirith. And when those that looked forth heard them, and saw afar the ruin and burning that the dragon made, they deemed that he had triumphed and was destroying those that assailed him. And Nienor sat and shuddered beside the falling water, and at the voice of Glaurung her darkness crept upon her again, so that she could not stir from that place of her own will. Even so Brandur found her, for he came to the Nengirith at last, limping warily. And when he heard that the dragon had crossed the river and had beaten down his foes, his heart yearned towards Nienor in pity. Yet he thought also, Turambar is dead, but Nienor lives. Now it may be that she will come with me, and I will lead her away, and so we shall escape from the dragon together. After a while, therefore, he stood by Nienor and said, "Come, it is time to go. If you will, I will lead you." And he took her hand, and she arose silently and followed him, and in the darkness none saw them go. yeah, no, I'll continue a little bit further, sorry. There's still more dialogue. But as they went down the path to the crossings, the moon rose and cast a great light on the land. And Nienor said, "Is this the way?" And Brander answered that he knew no way, save to flee as they might from Glaurung and escape into the wild. But Nienor said, "The black sword was my beloved and my husband. To seek him only do I go. What else could you think?" And she sped on before him. Thus she came towards the crossings of Teaglin, and beheld Hod and Elith in the white moonlight, and great dread came on her. Then with a cry she turned away, casting off her cloak, and fled southward along the river, and her white raiment shone in the moon. Thus Brander saw her from the hillside, and turned across her path, but he was still behind her when she came to the ruin of Glaurung, nigh the brink of Cabot and Aris. There she saw the dragon lying, but she heeded him not, for a man lay beside him, and she ran to Turambar, and called his name in vain. Then finding that his hand was burned, she washed it with tears and bound it about with a strip of her raiment. And she kissed him and cried on him again to awake. Oh wow, that's a new one. Thereat Glaurung stirred for the last time ere he died, and he spoke with his last breath, saying, "Hail Nienor, daughter of Túrin, we meet again ere the end. I give thee joy that thou hast found thy brother at last, and that now thou shalt know him, a stabber in the dark, treacherous to foes, faithless to friends, and a curse unto his kin, Túrin, son of Túrin. But the worst of all his deeds thou shalt feel in thyself." Then Glaurung died, and the veil of his malice was taken from her, and she remembered all the days of her life. Looking down upon Túrin, she cried, "Farewell, O twice beloved. Túrin Turambar, Turun Hambartarnen, master of doom by doom mastered. O happy to be dead." Then Brander, who had heard all, standing stricken upon the edge of ruin, hastened towards her, but she ran from him, distraught with horror and anguish. And coming to the brink of Cabot and Aris, she cast herself over, and was lost in the wild water. Alright, so a quick break here. So yeah, now it is... well, yes, this is why I like to kind of go across, reading, these chapters again. Because I think this is actually how Túrin dies. He pretty much dies from this poison, I think, which is crazy. But it's okay, so yeah, when Glaurung actually speaks to her, he actually does say daughter of Túrin, and there's Túrin, son of Túrin, so I was right. So wild. That is wild. Why? I don't know why they would become married and have a kid, or maybe have a kid. I don't know, because, okay. It's just a weird story, I suppose, and a weird twist. But anyway, yeah, so Glaurung is now finally slain because Túrin has a lot of hate and anger and vengeance toward him, and he gets it, but at a great cost, because now he's poisoned, and now it's his turn to become the doomed, I suppose. But the good thing is Glaurung is now slain, so that's good. And he was slain by a human, I should say. So, one win for humankind, I suppose. Of course, there was other notable characters and whatnot earlier, but I think Túrin is the one that stands out the most, I suppose. Yeah, just really crazy about the truth at the very last breath of Glaurung. Of course, he's just always trying to turn the tide, always trying to get that one last spell, that one last mind spell of torment. So, classic Glaurung. So, now we can go back to the story again. Then Brander came and looked down and turned away in horror, and though he no longer desired life, he could not seek death in that roaring water. And thereafter no man looked again upon Cabot and Aris, nor would any beast or bird come there, nor any tree grow, and it was named Cabot Neramarth, the leap of dreadful doom. But Brander made his way to Nengirith to bring tidings to the people, and he met Dorlas in the woods, and slew him, the first blood that he ever had spilled, and the last. And he came to Nengirith, and the men cried to him, "Have you seen her? For Nienor is gone." And he answered, "Nienor is gone forever. The dragon is dead, and Turambar is dead, and those tidings are good." The people murmured at these words, saying that he was crazed. But Brandir said, "Hear me to the end. Nienor the beloved is also dead. She cast herself into Teglin, desiring life no more, for she learned that she was none other than Nienor, daughter of Hurin of Dorlamin, ere her forgetfulness came upon her, and that Turambar was her brother, Túrin, son of Hurin." But even as he ceased, and the people wept, Túrin himself came before them. For when the dragon died, his swoon left him, and he fell into a deep sleep of weariness. But the cold of the night troubled him, and the hilts of Gurthang drove into his side, and he awoke. Then he saw that one had tended his hand, and he wondered much that he was left nonetheless to lie upon the cold ground. And he called, and hearing no answer, he went in search of aid, for he was weary and sick. But when the people saw him, they drew back in fear, thinking that it was his unquiet spirit. And he said, "Nay, be glad, for the dragon is dead, and I live. But wherefore have you scorned my counsel, and come into peril? And where is Nienor? For her I would see. And surely you did not bring her from her home?" Then Brandir told him that it was so, and Nienor was dead. But the wife of Dorlas cried out, "Nay, lord, he is crazed, for he came here saying that you were dead, and he called it good tidings, but you live." Then Turambar was wrathful, and believed that all Brandir said or did was done in malice towards himself and Nienor, begrudging their love, and he spoke evilly to Brandir, calling him Clubfoot. Then Brandir reported all that he had heard, and named Nienor, daughter of Hurin, and he cried out upon Turambar with the last words of Glaurung, that he was a curse unto his kin and to all that harbored him. Then Turambar fell into a fury, for in those words he heard the feet of his doom overtaking him, and he charged Brandir with leading Nienor to her death, and publishing with delight the lies of Glaurung, if indeed he devised them not himself. Then he cursed Brandir and slew him, and he fled from the people into the woods. But after a while his madness left him, and he came to Hod in Eleth, and there sat and pondered all his deeds. And he cried upon Finduilas to bring him counsel, for he knew not whether he would do now more ill to go to Doriath to seek his kin, or to forsake them forever and seek death in battle. Yeah, alright. Another quick break here. I'm trying, this might be an hour-long episode. My bad, guys. We got like one more page to go, and then we're good. So now, because Brandir is, I think he definitely was jealous of, I guess, brother and sister love, which is okay. Awkward. But of course, like, that's the thing. I didn't think that. I would have thought that Túrin would have known her, but maybe it's just because she was older than when he last saw them. I don't know. It's confusing. That's why it boggles my mind on this chapter. So Nienor is dead. She does actually, leap into I was gonna say Syrian, into the river. The Teglin. There you go. So she is actually dead, but Túrin is not. For some reason, I thought he actually was. So the book convinced me. Good writing, Tolkien. So he comes back and he pretty much blames Brandir for her death, ends up killing him, and then just escaping into the woods. So doom follows him wherever he goes. Classic Turambar. So we're just gonna go right back, and I think I'm actually gonna finish this chapter here. So let's do it. And even as he sat there, Mablung with a company of grey elves came over the crossings of Teglin, and he knew Túrin, and hailed him, and was glad indeed to find him yet living. For he had learned of the coming forth of Glaurung, and that his path led to Brethil, and also he had heard report that the black sword of Nargothrond now dwelt there. Therefore he came to give warning to Túrin, and help if need be. But Túrin said, "You come too late, the dragon is dead." Then they marveled, and gave him great praise, but he cared nothing for it, and said, "This only I ask. Give me news of my kin, for in Dorlamin I learned that they had gone to the hidden kingdom." Then Mablung was dismayed, but needs must tell to Túrin how Morwen was lost, and Nienor cast into a spell of dumb forgetfulness, and how she escaped them upon the borders of Doriath, and fled northwards. Then at last Túrin knew that doom had overtaken him, and that he had slain Brandir unjustly, so that the words of Glaurung were fulfilled in him. And he laughed as one fey, crying, "This is a bitter jest indeed." But he bade Mablung go, and return to Doriath with curses upon it. And a curse too upon your errand, he cried. This only was wanting, now comes the night. Then he fled from them like the wind, and they were amazed, wondering what madness had seized him. And they followed after him, but Túrin far outran them, and he came to Cabot-en-Aras, and heard the roaring of the water, and saw that all the leaves fell sere from the trees, as though winter had come. Therefore he drew forth his sword, that now alone remained to him of all his possessions, and he said, Hail, Gurthang! No lord or loyalty dost thou know, save the hand that wieldeth thee. From no blood wilt thou shrink. Wilt thou therefore take Turambar? Wilt thou slay me swiftly? And from the blade rang a cold voice in answer. Yea, I will drink thy blood gladly, so that I may forget the blood of Beleg my master, and the blood of Brandir slain unjustly. I will slay thee swiftly. Then Túrin set the hilts upon the ground, and cast himself upon the point of Gurthang, and the black blade took his life. But Mablung and the elves came and looked on the shape of Glaurung, lying dead, and upon the body of Túrin, and they grieved. And when men of Brethil came thither, and they learned the reasons of Túrin's madness and death, they were aghast. And Mablung said bitterly, I also have been meshed in the doom of the children of Húrin, and thus with my tidings have slain one that I loved. Then they lifted up Túrin, and found that Gurthang had broken asunder. But elves and men gathered there great store of wood, and they made a mighty burning, and the dragon was consumed to ashes. Túrin they laid in a high mound where he had fallen, and the shards of Gurthang were laid beside him. And when all was done, the elves sang a lament for the children of Húrin, and a great grey stone was set upon the mound, and thereon was carved in runes of Doriath, Túrin, Turambar, Dagnir, Glaurunga, and beneath they wrote also, Nienor, Nienor. But she was not there, nor was it ever known whither the cold waters of Teelin had taken her. Alright, we are now done with chapter 21, so that is very cool. I was hoping I would get it done in 50 minutes, and kind of went overboard on that one. Oops, my bad, guys. Yeah, so, the creepy thing about this is the sword actually kind of has this chilling, ghostly voice, I suppose. Yay, I will drink thy blood gladly, you know. Probably not like that, but, you know, it is kind of creepy. And you do know that the sword is definitely cursed, because he's like, you know what? I think this sword is still going to bring me doom from now on, from the start and through his whole journey. So now he's just like, well, I have literally nobody left, and he basically kills himself. So that's what I'm saying. This whole story of Túrin is just darkness upon, like, the layers of darkness and doom that is just constantly eating away at everything around him and everybody around him. It's just a very sad tale, I would assume. I don't know, would you just call it like a sad tune? I don't know. But yeah, so that is pretty much that, and the elves and men pretty much, they respect him because he slays Glaurung. But like, and then they realize the whole doom that he was pretty much set upon his whole life, and realize how hard it was for him. So, but yeah, so that is the end of the Tales of Túrin Turambar, the Master of Doom. Very, very cool stuff, I would still say, because I still enjoy reading this whole tale. And I'm trying to find the end of the actual book here. So, if you guys can see, we are actually... Man, I cannot do this properly. But we are actually... we're pretty close to the end. I would say in the next 10 chapters we should be done. 10 episodes, I should say. Probably not chapters. But we'll see. Hopefully I can be done with the Silmarillion by the end of the year, was my original plan. But we'll kind of see from there. But now, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you enjoy what I do here, my personal project and whatnot. I would absolutely love it if I could get more, followers, and have you guys just come along with the journey with me. I have so much more to go. Long, long, long ways, because as you can see behind me, I have a lot of books from Tolkien. So I still have a long, long ways to go with my project being, well, I mean, it's underway, but not even... barely even a quarter of the way through, I would guess, and I'm just guessing at the top of my head. So just be sure to just be subscribed so you don't miss an episode, and comment below what you enjoy about the show, what you about the Silmarillion, what you enjoy about Tolkien, pretty much anything like that. That would be great. If you do want to be part of the show, you can actually send me an email over at thelandsofordea@gmail.com. And we can schedule something like a little meeting, and what we talk about during the shows. You guys have probably seen, the guest video that I've done. It's just a really fun time. So, and of course, lastly, always be sure to check my book out, The Lands of Ordea. This is available on Amazon, and like I've said, for the past few episodes, I've built a whole history and a lore to it. There's magic, there's strife, there's so much that is into it, that is heavily influenced by Tolkien, among other really very cool authors. So I would appreciate it if you guys check my book out. So I would say that with all that being said, just stay tuned for the next episode, and may the light of Elbereth be with you all. Farewell.